Takeoff!
What?
Stop that takeoff. A 19-year-old girl shouted into the radio. Everyone went silent. She saw something veteran mechanics missed, a light flicker that meant 418 people would die in minutes. Nobody trusted the teenage rookie. Those failing generators would either prove she was right or end her career forever. She had 90 seconds to save them all. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. The pre-dawn air at Terminal 7 smelled of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, sense that Riley Chen had come to associate with purpose and precision. At 19, she was the youngest certified aircraft maintenance technician on the early shift, a fact that her supervisor mentioned at least twice daily, usually while assigning her tasks that required more clipboard work than actual mechanical knowledge. She didn't mind the treatment, not really. The veterans had earned their skepticism through decades of experience, countless aircraft inspections, and the hard-won wisdom that came from seeing what could go wrong when proper procedures weren't followed. She understood that trust in aviation wasn't given freely, it was built methodically, inspection by inspection, shift by shift, proving competence through consistent excellence rather than demanding recognition based on test scores or technical school achievements. She stood near taxiway Echo at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, completing a routine inspection of ground power equipment that had been flagged for minor electrical testing during the previous shift. Her coveralls bore grease stains from yesterday's work on a regional jet's landing gear assembly, dark smudges that marked her as someone who actually worked on aircraft rather than just supervising from a distance. Her safety vest hung loose over her small frame, the reflective stripes catching the glow of taxiway lights as massive aircraft rolled past in an endless parade of departures, each one a testament to human engineering and the thousands of people whose daily work kept modern aviation functioning safely. Around her, the airport was reaching the crescendo of its morning rush, dozens of flights preparing for takeoff, thousands of passengers trusting that the complex machinery would function exactly as designed, that the people maintaining these aircraft knew what they were doing and caught every potential problem before it became catastrophic. The responsibility weighed on Riley constantly, the awareness that every inspection she performed, every system she tested, every anomaly she investigated could be the difference between routine flight and disaster that killed hundreds. The radio on her belt crackled with ground control communications, the professional cadence of controllers coordinating aircraft movements with the precision of orchestrators conducting a mechanical symphony. She listened with half her attention while running diagnostic tests on the ground power unit, her hands moving through procedures she'd performed hundreds of times during training and her brief 3 months on the job. The work was methodical, almost meditative, and she found deep satisfaction in the predictability of electrical systems, the way they obeyed fundamental laws that never changed regardless of aircraft size or complexity. Voltage, current, resistance, these concepts were reliable in ways that human judgment sometimes wasn't. Alpha 72, taxi to runway 27 via Echo and November, hold short of the runway. The tower controller's voice carried professional crispness that indicated another routine departure beginning its sequence, one of hundreds that would occur today. Riley glanced up from her diagnostic tablet to watch the aircraft that would be designated Alpha 72 emerge from behind a terminal building, its massive form materializing from the pre-dawn shadows like a leviathan rising from deep water. The sight still took her breath away despite months of familiarity, a Boeing 777-300ER, one of the largest twin-engine wide-body aircraft in commercial service, its massive frame gliding forward on landing gear that stood taller than a house. The registration number gleamed in the darkness, and through the cockpit window she could see the flight crew beginning their takeoff preparations, no doubt running through checklists while 418 passengers and crew settled into seats behind them, most sleeping or reading or checking their phones, blissfully unaware of the mechanical complexity keeping them safe at every moment. The aircraft represented the pinnacle of engineering achievement, twin General Electric GE90 turbofan engines capable of producing over 70,000 pounds of thrust each, sophisticated flight control systems managed by multiple redundant computers, electrical generators powerful enough to supply electricity to a small town. Riley knew the systems intimately, having spent months during technical school memorizing every circuit, every backup system, every failure mode that engineers had anticipated and designed protection against. She'd scored perfectly on every electrical systems examination, earning praise from instructors who said she possessed intuitive understanding that normally required years of hands-on experience to develop, that she saw patterns and connections that other students missed entirely. That intuitive understanding saved 418 lives in the next 90 seconds, though Riley didn't know it yet as Alpha 72 taxied past her position, its engines at ground idle producing the characteristic low rumble of turbofans at minimal power. The navigation lights and taxi lights illuminated its path toward the runway threshold, standard lighting that every aircraft used during ground operations, nothing unusual or noteworthy about the display except something was wrong. The external lighting flickered, just for an instant, barely perceptible, a momentary dimming that most observers would dismiss as normal variation or perhaps a trick of pre-dawn shadows playing across the massive fuselage. But Riley's mind processed the flicker pattern with the automatic precision of someone who understood what the lights revealed about the systems powering them, the way a musician might hear a single wrong note in a symphony or an artist might spot incorrect color in a painting. The flicker frequency was wrong. She watched with growing horror as the aircraft continued taxiing, its lights flickering again in that same distinctive pattern, a specific rhythm that indicated voltage instability, not random variation but a signature of progressive generator failure developing in real time. Her training snapped into focus with terrible clarity. That flicker pattern meant the main electrical generators were failing, voltage regulators struggling to maintain stable output, systems degrading toward catastrophic collapse in a failure mode that would be invisible to cockpit instruments until total failure occurred. Her hands trembled as she grabbed her diagnostic tablet and pulled up the electrical system schematics she'd memorized, her mind racing through the technical implications with the speed that came from genuine understanding rather than rote memorization. A 777's electrical system relied on two main engine-driven generators plus an auxiliary power unit and multiple backup systems, layers of redundancy designed to ensure that electrical power never failed completely, that pilots always had the systems they needed to control the aircraft safely. Engineers had spent decades designing these redundancies, anticipating every possible failure mode, building protection upon protection. But if she was right about what that flicker pattern indicated, both main generators were experiencing the same progressive failure simultaneously, and the backup integration systems weren't engaging properly to compensate, which meant all those carefully designed redundancies were failing together in exactly the nightmare scenario that should have been statistically impossible. The probability calculations said this shouldn't happen, couldn't happen, that independent systems didn't fail in coordinated ways that defeated multiple layers of protection. Her breath caught in her throat as the full implications crystallized. If that aircraft took off with failing generators and faulty backup integration, the main electrical systems would collapse within minutes of reaching altitude. The cockpit would go dark, flight control computers would lose power, hydraulic systems that moved control surfaces would fail without electrical pumps, and the pilots would find themselves commanding a powerless aircraft at 30,000 feet with 418 souls aboard. The failure would be catastrophic and unsurvivable, the aircraft dropping from the sky over populated areas with no way to glide to safety or restore systems, no time to troubleshoot or implement emergency procedures, just sudden total loss of control followed by impact that killed everyone aboard and possibly people on the ground. She knew with absolute certainty that she had to act, but the weight of her age and inexperience crushed down on her with physical force that made it difficult to breathe. She was 19 years old, barely 3 months out of technical school, the rookie that senior mechanics watched carefully and double-checked constantly because everyone knew that new technicians made mistakes, missed things, needed supervision until they'd accumulated enough experience to work independently. She'd never stopped an aircraft departure, never contradicted tower controllers, never claimed to spot something that experienced professionals with decades of service had missed entirely. The adults around her had those decades of experience, had seen thousands of aircraft depart safely, had witnessed countless false alarms from overcautious technicians who thought they'd spotted problems that turned out to be nothing. They had every reason to dismiss concerns from a teenager who'd barely started her career, who lacked the practical experience that separated competent mechanics from exceptional ones. Aviation ran on experience and proven track records, not on theoretical knowledge from technical school or exceptional test scores that might not translate to real-world performance. But she also knew with absolute certainty that she was right. The flicker pattern was unmistakable to anyone who truly understood generator voltage regulation and electrical system behavior. That specific frequency, that particular timing, the way the lights dimmed and recovered, it was diagnostic for progressive voltage regulator failure on multiple generators simultaneously. She'd studied this exact failure mode in advanced electrical troubleshooting, had memorized the signatures that indicated different types of generator problems. That aircraft was experiencing catastrophic electrical system failure that would kill everyone aboard within minutes of takeoff. Alpha 72 was approaching the runway threshold now, maybe 60 seconds from receiving takeoff clearance from the tower. Once cleared, the pilots would advance throttles to maximum takeoff power, commit to departure, and accelerate down the runway past the point where they could safely abort. Within 10 minutes of leaving the ground, the electrical systems would collapse and everyone aboard would die in the resulting crash. Riley had 90 seconds at most, 90 seconds to overcome every instinct telling her to stay quiet, to defer to experience, to avoid the humiliation and career destruction that would follow if she was somehow wrong about this assessment. Her hand moved to her radio before her conscious mind fully committed to the decision, muscle memory overriding doubt and fear. She keyed the microphone and her voice emerged high and urgent, cutting across the professional ground control frequency with desperate intensity that violated every protocol about maintaining professional communication. Stop that takeoff. Aircraft Alpha 72 has critical electrical failure. Do not clear for departure. The radio frequency went silent for 3 heartbeats, the sudden absence of communication deafening after the constant flow of professional coordination. Riley's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might be visible through her coveralls, her young voice still echoing in her mind, wondering if she'd just destroyed her career over a lighting flicker that she'd somehow misinterpreted despite her training and absolute certainty about what she'd observed. Ground crew, identify yourself and explain this interruption immediately. The tower supervisor's voice carried sharp irritation mixed with confusion, the tone of someone dealing with an unexpected breach of protocol that couldn't be ignored but seemed absurd on its face. This frequency is reserved for authorized communications regarding immediate safety concerns. Identify yourself now. Riley forced herself to breathe, to speak clearly despite the terror making her hands shake and her voice want to crack. This is Maintenance Technician Riley Chen, employee number 7429, working ground equipment inspection at Taxiway Echo. She hesitated, knowing exactly how this would sound, knowing that what she was about to say would make everything harder, then pushed forward with brutal honesty because lying or omitting her age would only make things worse when the truth came out. I'm 19 years old and I know I'm nobody, I know I just started this job, but that aircraft has generator failure developing right now. The external lighting flicker pattern indicates imminent total electrical system collapse. If they take off, everyone dies. Please, you have to check the generators before clearing takeoff. She could hear Alpha 72's captain on the frequency now, his voice carrying professional confusion mixed with understandable irritation at having his departure interrupted. Tower, this is Alpha 72. We show all systems normal, all cockpit indications green across the board. We have no alerts, no warnings, no anomalies detected. Request clarification on the nature of this delay and estimated time to resolution. Alpha 72, stand by 1. The tower supervisor sounded torn between standard procedures that said cockpit instruments were authoritative and the inherent caution drilled into everyone working aviation safety, the awareness that dismissing a safety concern, even an unlikely one, could lead to catastrophe. Maintenance Tech Chen, you're claiming to see electrical failure from external observation. Based on lighting behavior visible from ground level while the aircraft was taxiing? Yes, sir. Riley's voice steadied as she shifted into technical explanation, the one area where her age didn't matter, where knowledge spoke louder than years of experience. The flicker frequency I observed indicates generator voltage regulator failure on both main systems, approximately 0.8 Hz oscillation with amplitude suggesting imminent catastrophic collapse. That specific pattern is diagnostic for progressive failure that won't show on cockpit indications until the cascade becomes catastrophic and unrecoverable. The backup integration isn't engaging properly. I can tell from the timing lag between flickers on different lighting circuits. This is exactly the failure mode we studied in advanced electrical troubleshooting, the nightmare scenario where multiple independent systems fail simultaneously. She was aware of ground vehicles converging on her position now, supervisors responding to the unprecedented radio transmission from a junior technician stopping an aircraft departure and creating chaos in ground operations. She recognized her shift supervisor's truck approaching at speed, the man's face visible through the windshield showing fury that she'd caused this massive disruption to operations. Senior mechanics were probably listening to this radio traffic, wondering what the hell the kid was doing making claims about electrical failures on aircraft they personally inspected and cleared. But she kept talking, kept providing technical justification, because 418 people were depending on adults believing a teenager's technical assessment despite every reason to dismiss her concerns as rookie panic or misunderstanding. Sir, the cockpit won't show anything wrong yet because the monitoring system itself has a latent fault. The failure is hiding from the instruments by corrupting the data that feeds the cockpit displays. But at altitude, when they need full generator output for pressurization systems and full flight control authority, the main generators will collapse within 8 to 10 minutes of takeoff. Both of them, simultaneously, because they're failing from the same root cause, probably a manufacturing defect in voltage regulator components. And when backup integration tries to engage to restore power, the fault in that system means it won't transfer properly and they'll have total electrical failure with no recovery possible. Riley took a shaky breath and pushed on, her voice rising with desperation. Sir, I've studied every electrical system failure mode on the 777 platform. I scored perfect on every exam. I know these systems inside and out. I know I'm young and inexperienced and everyone has more time on the job than me. But I am absolutely certain about this technical assessment. I'm begging you, please don't let them take off. Please inspect those generators. 418 people are on that aircraft and they'll all die if it takes off in current condition. The tower's supervisor's long pause felt eternal, the weight of his impossible decision pressing through the radio silence. An aircraft captain was protesting the delay, 418 passengers were waiting and would complain about schedule disruption, airline operations centers were demanding explanations for why a major international departure was being held, and all of it hinged on whether an adult with authority would trust a 19-year-old's technical assessment over years of standard procedures that said cockpit instruments were the final authority on aircraft systems condition. The supervisor was probably thinking about his career, about what would happen if he delayed the flight based on a teenager's claims and she turned out to be wrong. The costs would be enormous, hundreds of thousands of dollars in delays, passenger compensation, schedule disruptions cascading through the entire airline network. He'd be questioned, investigated, possibly disciplined for stopping operations based on inadequate evidence. His professional judgment would be forever tainted by the time he trusted a 19-year-old over established procedures and experienced flight crews. But he was also probably thinking about the alternative: what would happen if he dismissed her concerns and she was right? 418 people dead, an aircraft worth hundreds of millions destroyed, an airline devastated by the worst disaster in its history, and his own knowledge that he'd heard a legitimate safety concern and ignored it because the person raising it was too young to be taken seriously. Alpha 72, hold position at runway threshold, the supervisor finally commanded, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone making a decision that could end careers including his own. Return to taxi frequency. Maintenance inspection required before takeoff clearance is granted. Estimated delay time unknown pending technical evaluation. Riley's legs nearly gave out from relief, her body sagging against the ground equipment she'd been inspecting when this all started. But immediately the terror returned with renewed force. What if she was wrong? What if her interpretation of the flicker pattern was somehow mistaken, some anomaly she didn't understand, some normal variation that looked like failure to her inexperienced eyes? She'd just cost the airline hundreds of thousands of dollars delaying an international departure based on her assessment that experienced mechanics apparently hadn't noticed. If she was wrong, her career was over before it really began, forever known as the teenager who panicked and stopped operations over nothing, whose theoretical knowledge didn't translate to real-world competence. Her supervisor arrived in his truck, Steve Martinez, slamming the door hard enough that Riley flinched. The older man approached with a face purple with rage, his decades of experience evident in every frustrated gesture. "Chen. What the hell do you think you're doing? Do you have any idea what stopping a 777 departure costs? Do you understand the disruption you just caused? You'd better be absolutely right about this, because if you're not..." "I'm right," Riley interrupted, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice despite her terror. "Test the generators, Steve. Please. Run full diagnostics on both main generators and check backup integration system functionality. The failure is there, I know it is." The flicker pattern was diagnostic, not ambiguous. "This isn't me being overcautious or panicking. This is real." Senior mechanics were rushing toward Alpha 72 now with diagnostic equipment, summoned by the tower's maintenance inspection requirement. Riley watched them approach the massive aircraft with their testing gear, saw them connecting equipment to external power panels and access ports, their movements carrying skepticism visible even from a distance. She'd worked with these men for 3 months, had absorbed their jokes about her age, their gentle corrections when she made minor mistakes, their tendency to double-check everything she did because she was the kid, the rookie who needed supervision and guidance before being trusted with complex work. Now they were testing her technical assessment that had stopped a major departure, and within minutes they'd either vindicate her exceptional intuition or prove her a foolish child who didn't understand what she thought she knew. The difference between those two outcomes was the difference between saving 418 lives and destroying her own career, between being remembered as the prodigy who prevented disaster and being known as the teenager who panicked and cost millions in delays based on misunderstanding basic electrical behavior. The diagnostic testing took 4 minutes that felt like hours of agonizing uncertainty. Riley stood beside her supervisor's truck, watching the senior mechanics work while ground control rerouted other departures around the delayed aircraft, while passengers aboard Alpha 72 complained to flight attendants about the frustrating holdup, while airline operations centers demanded status updates and threatened consequences if this delay wasn't justified by actual technical problems. The tower's supervisor kept the radio frequency clear, waiting for maintenance report, his career hanging on whether he'd made the right call, trusting a teenager's claims over cockpit instruments and established procedures. Riley's radio crackled with the voice of Dave Morrison, the senior electrical systems specialist who trained her during her first weeks on the job, who'd patiently explained complex systems and answered her endless questions with the tolerance of someone who enjoyed teaching. His voice carried shock and disbelief that made Riley's heart leap with vindication and terror. "Tower, this is Morrison from Maintenance Team 7. We've completed initial diagnostics on Alpha 72's electrical generation systems." He paused, and Riley heard him take a shaky breath before continuing with words that would change her life forever. "Both main generators are in progressive failure state, exactly as reported by Tech Chen. Voltage regulators are degraded beyond operational limits, showing imminent collapse characteristics. Backup integration system has fault and transfer logic that would prevent proper engagement during main generator failure. The monitoring system has a data corruption fault that was masking the failure from cockpit displays." Morrison's voice grew stronger, more urgent. If this aircraft had taken off in current condition, it would have suffered complete electrical system collapse within 8 to 10 minutes of flight, exactly as Tech Chen predicted. Total loss of flight controls, navigation, communication, complete electrical death with no recovery possible. This aircraft is not airworthy for departure. We need immediate towing to maintenance hangar for emergency repairs and full electrical system replacement. The radio frequency erupted in controlled chaos, controllers coordinating the aircraft's return to terminal, airline operations demanding detailed failure analysis, ground crews preparing to tow the massive jet back to maintenance hangar, passengers being informed of extended delay while airlines scrambled to find alternate aircraft. But Riley barely heard any of it, her body flooding with relief so intense it left her lightheaded and dizzy. She'd been right. The technical evidence had been real, not misinterpreted. 418 people were alive because she'd trusted her knowledge enough to risk everything, because she'd overcome her self-doubt and spoken up despite having every reason to stay silent. Steve, her supervisor, stared at her with an expression mixing shock, respect, and something resembling fear, the look of someone realizing they'd been working alongside exceptional talent without recognizing it. "How did you see that?" Morrison and his entire crew walked past that aircraft during pre-departure inspection. Nobody noticed anything wrong. The flight crew showed green cockpit indications. "How did you spot generator failure from external lighting observation?" "The lights," Riley explained quietly, her voice shaking now that the adrenaline was fading and leaving her exhausted. The external lighting flicker had a specific frequency and pattern, 0.8 Hz oscillation with characteristic amplitude that's diagnostic for voltage regulation failure. It's covered in advanced troubleshooting training, the exact signature that indicates regulator components failing. Most people wouldn't notice because it looks like normal variation in lighting intensity, but when you understand what the flicker reveals about the underlying electrical system behavior and generator performance characteristics. She trailed off, suddenly aware how young she sounded explaining electrical theory to someone with 20 years of experience. But Steve wasn't looking at her like she was a kid anymore. He was looking at her the way people looked at someone who just prevented a major disaster through sheer technical brilliance that defied normal experience curves. "Chen, do you understand what you just did? That aircraft would have gone down. Everyone aboard, dead. Crew, passengers, all 418 people. Probably would have crashed into populated areas during emergency descent attempt, killed people on the ground too. You saved over 400 lives by trusting your training and having the courage to speak up despite your age." The number felt impossible, too large to comprehend on emotional level. Riley had stopped an aircraft from taking off, that was all, done her job exactly as she'd been trained, reported a legitimate safety concern based on technical observation, trusted her understanding of electrical systems. But the reality was expanding in her mind with crushing weight, 418 individual human beings, each with families and futures and dreams and people who loved them, all of whom would have died if she'd stayed quiet, if she'd deferred to experience, if she'd doubted her own technical knowledge because of her age and inexperience. Within an hour, the story spread through the airport with the viral speed of digital communication and shocked word of mouth. Riley found herself summoned to the maintenance supervisor's office, where senior managers she'd never met wanted detailed explanations for how she'd spotted generator failure that experienced mechanics had completely missed during standard pre-departure inspection. She walked them through the technical analysis step by step, explaining flicker frequency calculations and voltage regulation behavior, describing the diagnostic signatures she'd observed and the failure mode implications, watching their expressions shift from initial skepticism to grudging respect to genuine awe as they realized the depth of her technical understanding. The aircraft captain, a veteran pilot named James Richardson with 30 years of experience flying wide-body jets across oceans and continents, personally requested to meet her. Riley stood in the maintenance office feeling absurdly young in her grease-stained coveralls while Captain Richardson thanked her for saving his life and the lives of everyone he'd been responsible for getting safely to their destination. He was old enough to be her grandfather, his face lined with years of experience and the confident bearing of someone who'd commanded massive aircraft through every challenge aviation could present, and he was thanking her, a 19-year-old mechanic, for keeping him from dying in a disaster he'd never seen coming. The cockpit indications showed everything normal, he explained, his voice carrying the shaken quality of someone who'd glimpsed how close death had been without warning. All our instruments said the aircraft was perfectly fine, ready for departure. Generator output showed normal, electrical system status showed green, no warnings or alerts anywhere. We would have taken off, climbed to altitude, and then. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. They both understood what total electrical failure at 30,000 feet meant. You trusted your technical knowledge enough to stop us, even though you're young enough to be my granddaughter, even though you had every reason to doubt yourself. That took extraordinary courage, Riley. And your technical skill, spotting that failure mode from external observation while the aircraft was taxiing, that's not normal capability. That's exceptional talent that most mechanics never develop even after decades of experience. Riley didn't know how to respond to praise from someone with 3 decades more experience than she possessed, someone who'd forgotten more about aviation than she'd yet learned. She settled for complete honesty. "I was terrified I'd be wrong, sir. I almost didn't say anything because I'm so new at this, because everyone has more experience than me, because I thought maybe I was misinterpreting something and making a fool of myself. But the technical evidence was absolutely clear, and I couldn't let people die because I was scared of looking foolish or destroying my career." The math was undeniable. That flicker pattern meant generator failure, and generator failure on both mains with backup integration fault meant everyone aboard would die. Richardson nodded slowly, his respect evident. That's the decision that defines careers in aviation safety. Technical knowledge matters enormously, but courage to act on that knowledge even when it costs you personally, that's what actually saves lives. You had both the knowledge and the courage. Most people have one or the other, rarely both. The Federal Aviation Administration launched a full investigation within hours, sending inspectors to examine how both main generators had developed identical progressive failures and why the backup integration system had faulted simultaneously, creating the exact nightmare scenario that multiple redundancies were designed to prevent. Their preliminary findings confirmed Riley's technical assessment in every detail. The generators had been degrading due to manufacturing defect in voltage regulator components, a subtle fault that affected multiple aircraft from the same production batch. The backup system fault was unrelated but equally serious, a software error in transfer logic that prevented proper engagement during main generator failure, effectively defeating the redundancy that should have protected against single-point failures. The combination represented the exact nightmare scenario that aerospace engineers had considered statistically impossible: dual main generator failure plus backup system fault plus monitoring system corruption, creating condition where aircraft could lose all electrical power in flight with no warning to the crew and no recovery possible. And it had been completely invisible to cockpit instruments due to the monitoring system fault, making the developing catastrophe undetectable to flight crews until total collapse occurred and all systems went dark simultaneously. It's the kind of failure scenario we specifically design against, the FAA inspector explained to Riley during his interview, his tone mixing professional assessment with barely concealed amazement. Multiple independent systems failing simultaneously in ways that compound rather than compensate, defeating every layer of redundancy. It shouldn't happen according to probability calculations, but it did. And you spotted it from external observation while the aircraft was taxiing past your position. How is that even possible? Riley explained the flicker pattern analysis again, walking through the technical reasoning that had told her the generators were experiencing catastrophic failure. The inspector listened with the careful attention of someone evaluating exceptional talent that needed to be understood and nurtured. Then he asked the question that had been bothering everyone: "You're 19 years old. 3 months of actual on-the-job experience. How do you have the pattern recognition capability to identify generator voltage regulation failure from external lighting behavior?" That's knowledge and intuition that usually requires years of hands-on troubleshooting experience, seeing hundreds of aircraft, diagnosing countless problems. Where did you learn this? She didn't have a good answer except the complete truth: electrical systems make sense to me in ways I can't fully explain, sir. They follow predictable rules and laws. When I see anomalous behavior, anything that deviates from expected patterns, my brain automatically runs through what could cause that specific pattern, what system conditions would produce those exact symptoms. The flicker frequency was diagnostic, not ambiguous. There's only one failure mode that creates that exact oscillation pattern with that specific amplitude. I saw it and knew immediately what it meant and what the consequences would be if the aircraft took off. The inspector nodded slowly, making notes. We call that mechanical intuition when it develops naturally. It's extremely rare, especially at your age. Most technicians develop it gradually through years of experience, if they develop it at all. You appear to have been born with it, combined with exceptional technical education. The FAA will be issuing an emergency airworthiness directive about this failure mode based on your observation. We'll be checking every 777 from the affected production batch worldwide. Your observation likely prevented multiple disasters. Other aircraft probably have the same defect developing undetected in their electrical systems. The weight of that statement took several seconds to fully register in Riley's mind. She hadn't just saved 418 people on one flight. Her single observation, her 90-second decision to speak up despite her youth and inexperience, had triggered system-wide safety improvements that would protect potentially thousands of future passengers across dozens of aircraft that shared the manufacturing defect. The ripple effects of her courage extended far beyond that single prevented disaster. But with vindication and praise came new pressure that Riley hadn't anticipated. By the end of her shift, she was no longer the anonymous rookie mechanic that veterans supervised and double-checked and treated like a student still learning basic skills. She was the 19-year-old prodigy who'd prevented a major disaster, the technician whose technical assessment had overridden cockpit instruments and proven correct, someone whose exceptional talent had been dramatically demonstrated in the most high-stakes way imaginable. Senior mechanics who treated her like a child yesterday now sought her opinions on complex electrical problems, deferring to her assessment with respect that felt simultaneously earned and undeserved despite what she'd accomplished. Her supervisor assigned her to complex diagnostic work normally reserved for specialists with years of experience. The airline's safety director personally requested her participation in failure analysis procedures, wanting her exceptional pattern recognition involved in investigating other potential problems before they became catastrophes. The praise felt wrong somehow, more burden than reward. Riley had simply done her job, spotted a safety issue based on her training and reported it through proper channels. That's what every mechanic was supposed to do, regardless of age or experience level. Aviation safety depended on everyone being vigilant, on people speaking up when they observed anomalies. But people treated her action as extraordinary rather than expected, and she struggled with the uncomfortable awareness that she'd only done what was right, nothing more than what her training and conscience demanded. The passengers aboard Alpha 72 learned gradually throughout the day what their frustrating departure delay had actually prevented. Social media posts from that flight began appearing by mid-afternoon, initial stories of frustration and anger about the delay turning to shock, horror, and profound gratitude as people realized the teenage mechanic they might have complained about had literally saved their lives through technical knowledge and courage they couldn't begin to understand. One post went viral across multiple platforms, a mother holding her infant daughter, explaining through tears that she'd been furiously angry about the delay making her miss a crucial connection, angry enough that she'd complained loudly to flight attendants about the incompetence causing problems and wasting her time. Then she'd learned the truth. A 19-year-old mechanic had stopped their takeoff because she'd spotted electrical failure that would have killed everyone aboard within minutes of reaching altitude. I complained about being inconvenienced, the mother wrote with raw emotion. I demanded explanations for why we were delayed. Meanwhile, a teenager was saving my daughter's life, saving all our lives. Thank you, Riley Chen. I'm so sorry I was angry about being alive. Riley read the posts with tears streaming down her face, the reality of what she'd prevented finally hitting her with full emotional force that her professional composure couldn't deflect. These were real people, individuals with names and families and futures and dreams, all of whom would have died if she'd stayed silent out of fear or self-doubt. The baby in that photo would never have grown up, would have died before her first birthday because of generator failure that nobody else had noticed or understood. The weight of that alternate reality, the one where Riley had doubted herself and 418 people had died, crushed down on her with suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. Dave Morrison found her in the maintenance break room that evening, sitting alone with her phone displaying passenger photos and heartbreaking thank you messages from people who'd come so close to death without ever knowing it. The veteran mechanic sat down across from her, his weathered face showing deep understanding that came from decades working aviation safety and knowing the weight of preventing disasters. It's hitting you now, he said quietly, gently. What you prevented. The lives that would have been lost. The families that would have been destroyed. It's real to you now in ways it wasn't when you were just focused on the technical problem. Riley nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. Morrison continued with compassion, I've been doing this job for 27 years. I've prevented my share of disasters through careful work and attention to detail and following procedures exactly. But I've never done what you did today, spotted catastrophic failure from external observation while aircraft was taxiing, overcame your own inexperience and age and self-doubt to speak up, and saved over 400 lives through pure technical intuition and courage. That's not just competent work, Riley. That's extraordinary. That's the kind of decision that defines entire careers. I was so scared I was wrong, Riley whispered, her voice breaking. I almost didn't say anything because I'm 19 and everyone has so much more experience than me. What if I'd stayed quiet? What if I'd let fear and self-doubt keep me silent? All those people. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't articulate the horror of that alternate timeline. But you didn't stay quiet, Morrison interrupted firmly, his conviction absolute. You trusted your technical knowledge more than you feared being wrong. That's what makes someone exceptional in this field, not just having the knowledge, but having the courage to act on it when lives depend on being right and everything in your situation argues for staying silent. And you were right. The diagnostics proved it, the FAA confirmed it, and 418 people are alive right now because you spoke up despite having every reason not to. He stood to leave, then paused and looked back at her with something approaching reverence, the kind of respect veterans rarely showed to rookies. I trained you during your first weeks here. Taught you procedures, showed you diagnostic techniques, answered all your questions. But today I learned something crucial from you. Trust the technical evidence even when experience and authority say otherwise, speak up even when your position and age work against you, and never let fear of consequences silence you when safety is at stake. Thank you for teaching me that lesson. Thank you for reminding me what courage looks like. After he left, Riley sat alone with her thoughts and the knowledge that her life had changed irrevocably and permanently. She would never again be anonymous, never again be just another mechanic performing routine work in comfortable obscurity. People would remember her as the 19-year-old who saved 418 lives, would expect exceptional performance because she demonstrated exceptional talent in the most dramatic way possible, would watch her career with the awareness that she possessed rare gifts that required careful nurturing and development. The pressure felt overwhelming, the expectation that she'd always be brilliant, always spot what others missed, always make the right decision under impossible pressure. She was still a teenager, still learning fundamental skills, still making mistakes and needing guidance and supervision. But she'd proven herself capable of seeing patterns that veterans overlooked, of trusting her intuition despite her inexperience, of acting with extraordinary courage when lives depended on being right despite every incentive to stay silent. The next morning, Riley returned to work expecting everything to feel different, transformed by what had happened, but the airport was fundamentally the same, massive jets taxiing and departing, mechanics performing inspections and repairs, ground crews coordinating movements with practiced efficiency. She clocked in at her usual time, put on her grease-stained coveralls and safety vest, and checked her assignment sheet expecting routine maintenance tasks that would allow her to process everything that had happened. Instead, her supervisor handed her a completely different assignment that changed the trajectory of her entire career, Electrical Systems Specialist Trainee, Accelerated Certification Program, working directly with the senior diagnostic team on complex troubleshooting cases. The airline wants your talent developed properly, Steve explained, his respect evident. No more routine ground equipment checks and basic inspections. You'll be working complex electrical troubleshooting, learning from our best people, building systematically on what you already understand intuitively. The company recognizes what you did, Riley. They want to make sure that kind of talent gets the training and opportunities it deserves. Riley accepted the assignment with the same quiet competence she'd brought to every task since starting the job, determined to prove that yesterday's brilliant observation wasn't a fluke or lucky guess but the result of genuine technical understanding combined with courage to act. She would learn from veterans with decades of experience, would earn their continued respect through consistent excellence and humble willingness to acknowledge what she still needed to learn, would prove herself worthy of the second chance at life she'd given 418 people. As she walked toward the maintenance hangar where senior specialists were waiting to begin her accelerated training, Riley passed Alpha 72 being prepared for its eventual departure after extensive emergency repairs. The massive aircraft sat on the tarmac looking identical to any other 777, but now Riley knew its secret history, the disaster that almost happened, the catastrophic failure that had been hidden from everyone except a 19-year-old mechanic who trusted her technical knowledge enough to speak up despite having no authority and every reason to doubt herself. She touched the aircraft's fuselage briefly as she passed, a gesture of connection to the 418 people whose lives had intersected with hers through pure chance, technical intuition, and the courage to act when action was terrifying. They would never know her personally, would never understand the terror she'd felt making that radio call or how close the decision had been between speaking up and staying silent. Most would forget the incident within weeks, returning to their lives with the comfortable assumption that disasters were prevented by systems and procedures rather than by individual humans making split-second decisions that could destroy their careers if wrong. But they were alive. Somewhere right now, that mother was holding her infant daughter who would grow up and have her own children someday. Passengers who complained about the delay were having dinners with families, pursuing careers, living futures that would have been erased if Riley had let fear silence her. 418 people were breathing, thinking, feeling, living because she'd seen a flicker pattern that everyone else missed and had possessed both the technical knowledge to understand its meaning and the courage to act despite her age, inexperience, and the overwhelming pressure to defer to authority. Riley Chen was 19 years old, barely started in a career that would define the rest of her life and influence countless others who would learn from her example. She'd saved 418 people through exceptional technical knowledge and split-second decision-making, had proven that youth didn't preclude brilliance, that inexperience could be overcome by courage and certainty about technical fundamentals. The aviation industry would remember this day forever, would tell the story of the teenage mechanic who spotted catastrophic failure that everyone else missed, would use her example in training programs to teach the importance of speaking up regardless of rank or experience. But for Riley, the story was simpler and more personal. She'd seen something wrong, had trusted her training and understanding, and had acted to prevent disaster despite every reason to stay silent. That was the job, protecting lives through technical competence and courage to speak up when safety was threatened regardless of personal consequences. Her age didn't matter in the end, her inexperience was irrelevant to the technical reality she'd observed. What mattered was that when the moment came, when 418 lives hung on her decision to act or remain silent, she'd made the right choice. And she would spend the rest of her career knowing that she had saved those people not through luck or accident, but through the same qualities that would define her future: exceptional technical understanding, courage to trust her knowledge despite self-doubt and external pressure, and willingness to risk everything to do what was right when lives depended on her actions. Those were the qualities that made heroes in aviation safety, regardless of age, regardless of years of experience, regardless of what others expected or believed possible. Riley Chen was 19 years old, and she'd just proven that sometimes the youngest voice in the room is the one that needs to be heard most urgently, that fresh training and instinctive pattern recognition could spot what decades of experience overlooked. The industry would learn from her example, would remember that technical brilliance and moral courage existed in unexpected people, would never again dismiss safety concerns based solely on the age or experience level of the person raising them. 418 people were alive because someone so young possessed both the knowledge to spot disaster developing and the courage to prevent it despite overwhelming pressure to stay silent. That was the story that would be told in aviation safety training programs for generations to come, the story of the 90-second decision that saved hundreds of lives, made by a teenage mechanic who refused to let her youth or inexperience silence her when truth and lives were at stake. The sun was rising fully now over the airport, illuminating the endless parade of departures and arrivals that represented humanity's triumph over gravity and distance. Each aircraft carried hundreds of people who trusted that the complex systems would function exactly as designed, that the mechanics maintaining these machines knew what they were doing and caught every problem before it became catastrophic. Most would never think about the 19-year-old in grease-stained coveralls who'd proven that trust was justified, that the system worked because individuals had the courage to speak up when they saw something wrong. Riley walked into her new future with that knowledge carrying both weight and purpose. She had saved 418 lives yesterday. Today, she would begin learning how to save many more throughout a career that would be defined by that single moment when she chose courage over fear, knowledge over doubt, and action over silence. The industry needed people like her, people who saw what others missed and had the courage to act despite every reason not to. The story of Riley Chen and Alpha 72 would become legend in aviation safety circles, a reminder that disaster prevention sometimes came from unexpected sources, that technical brilliance could exist in people barely out of their teenage years, and that the courage to speak up despite lacking authority or experience was often the difference between tragedy and salvation. 418 people owed their lives to 90 seconds of courage from someone the world had every reason to ignore. That was the power of technical knowledge combined with moral courage. That was what made aviation safety work despite the complexity and the stakes and the endless opportunities for catastrophic failure. That was what Riley Chen had proven on that pre-dawn morning when she trusted herself enough to stop a departure and save hundreds of lives. And that was what she would carry forward into every future decision, every technical assessment, every moment when speaking up might cost her personally but staying silent might cost lives. The lesson had been learned at the highest possible stakes, and it would guide her for the rest of her extraordinary career in aviation safety.